Heartbroken at Christmas, her friends set up a blind date to cheer her up. But when her ex-fiancé's brother walked in, everything changed. The Evans family Christmas party invitation still sat unopened on Sarah Mitchell's kitchen counter, mocking her with its elegant gold embossing and cheerful red envelope. 3 weeks ago, she would have been helping plan this party, standing in that massive kitchen with her almost mother-in-law, arguing good-naturedly about whether to serve traditional plum pudding or try something more modern. Now she was just another awkward loose end in the wake of her broken engagement to Mark Evans, heir to the Evans department store empire and apparently serial cheater. "You have to stop staring at that invitation like it's going to bite you," Rachel said, sliding a generous glass of wine across Sarah's kitchen island. "And you definitely need to stop watching Mark's Instagram stories. I saw you checking them earlier." Sarah quickly locked her phone screen, but not before catching one last glimpse of Mark and Jennifer ice skating at Rockefeller Center, the exact Christmas date she and Mark had been planning for months. "I wasn't watching his stories. I was just checking the weather." "Right. And I'm secretly Santa Claus." Rachel took a long sip of wine. "Which is why you're coming with me tomorrow night." "I told you, I'm not ready to date. It's been 3 weeks since I found them together. 3 weeks since I had to call off a wedding that was supposed to happen in February. I still have vendors to cancel and deposits to fight for." At this point, dear viewer, if you've ever faced a moment when life blindsided you, consider hitting the like button. Your support not only encourages us to keep telling these stories, but also helps this channel grow. If you're new here, don't forget to subscribe. It's free and means the world to us during these early days. Thank you. Rachel leaned forward, her expression serious. "Sarah, honey, I love you, which is why I can't let you spend another night watching Love Actually and crying into your hot chocolate. It's just coffee. 1 hour of your life. The guy's great. He's traveled the world. He's passionate about making a difference. And, most importantly, he's nothing like Mark." If only Rachel knew how many times Sarah had caught Mark texting other women over the years, how many explanations she'd accepted. "They're just clients," he'd say. "You're being paranoid." Finding him with Jennifer at Alessandro's, their special occasion restaurant, had just been the final proof she'd been ignoring red flags all along. "Fine," Sarah sighed, reaching for her wine. 1 hour, but I'm not promising anything else." "That's my girl." Rachel's smile was a little too triumphant, but Sarah was too tired to analyze it. "Tomorrow at 7, the Coffee Bean on Main Street. Wear that green sweater that makes your eyes pop." The next evening, Sarah found herself spending way too much time on her makeup for just coffee. The green sweater did look good, making her eyes appear more emerald than their usual hazel. She'd let her caramel-colored hair fall in natural waves past her shoulders, the way she used to wear it before Mark had commented that straight hair looked more professional. Main Street was decked out in its full holiday splendor, every lamppost wrapped in evergreen garlands and twinkling lights. The Coffee Bean's windows were frosted with artificial snow, and a small Christmas tree in the corner was decorated with tiny coffee cups and bakery-themed ornaments. Sarah had deliberately arrived 10 minutes early, choosing a table with a clear view of the door. At exactly 7 o'clock, the bell above the door chimed. Sarah's heart stopped. Standing in the doorway, brushing snow from his leather jacket, was David Evans, Mark's older brother, the family wild child who'd walked away from the family business 5 years ago to backpack across Asia. The same David who'd tutored her through advanced economics in college, who'd sat next to her at family dinners making quiet jokes while Mark held court at the head of the table. The David she'd sometimes caught looking at her with an expression that made her wonder. His dark hair was longer now, touched with silver at the temples, and his face was tanned from years in the sun. But his eyes, those intense gray eyes that had always seemed to see right through her, were exactly the same. "Hello, Sarah," he said softly, unwinding a blue scarf from his neck. "You look beautiful." And just like that, Sarah realized Rachel's matchmaking wasn't about moving on. It was about finally facing what had been there all along. David's unexpected presence reopened old questions Sarah had buried. Was the quiet connection she felt with him all those years ago real? She had dismissed it back then as a fleeting moment of closeness, out of loyalty to Mark. But now, as David sat across from her, sharing stories of his travels and quietly apologizing for the family drama she endured, Sarah couldn't deny the spark between them. As they talked, the past faded away, replaced by laughter and shared memories. David's stories of teaching in remote villages and his efforts in conservation painted a picture of someone who had lived a life full of purpose, so different from Mark's world of superficial charm and endless excuses. For several long moments, neither of them spoke. The coffee shop's ambient noise seemed to fade away, leaving only the soft Christmas music playing overhead and the rapid beating of Sarah's heart. "I'm going to kill Rachel," Sarah finally managed, gripping her unopened menu like a shield. David's laugh was low and warm, carrying a reassurance that melted some of the tension in her chest. "Don't be too hard on her. She didn't exactly tell me who I'd be meeting either. Just said there was someone I needed to see now that I was back in town." He settled into the chair across from her, his movements careful, like he was afraid she might bolt. Though I think I understand now why she was so insistent. A barista appeared with water glasses, breaking the silence as Sarah used the moment to gather her thoughts. She clutched the glass tightly, her fingers trembling slightly as she tried to reconcile the whirlwind of emotions coursing through her. "How long have you been back?" she asked finally, her voice steadier than she expected. 3 days, David said, tracing a pattern on the edge of his glass. "I was planning to surprise everyone at the family Christmas party, but then Rachel called, told me about Mark and Jennifer." His jaw tightened, a flash of anger in his usually calm demeanor. "I'm sorry, Sarah. My brother's an idiot." Sarah held up a hand, shaking her head. "Please, I can't. I don't want to talk about Mark. The pain is still—" She paused, searching for the right words. "Fresh?" David nodded, respecting her boundaries. "Why did you agree to this blind date then?" Sarah gave a humorless laugh. "Rachel wouldn't take no for an answer. She's worried I'm turning into some kind of holiday hermit. She might have a point. And here I was, thinking you were as strong as I remembered," David said softly. The Sarah I knew never let anything keep her down for long. The words were a balm to her wounded pride, yet they also stung with the truth. Was she letting Mark's betrayal define her? Had she truly lost her spark? Before she could respond, the bell above the door chimed again. Sarah's stomach dropped as Mark entered, Jennifer trailing behind him. His polished image was as familiar as it was detestable. Expensive coat, practiced smirk, and an air of entitlement that made her skin crawl. His eyes scanned the room, narrowing when they landed on her and David. "Well, isn't this cozy?" Mark said loudly, his voice dripping with disdain. "I guess now I know why you wouldn't answer my calls, Sarah. Too busy with my brother?" David stood, his posture calm but protective. "Mark, leave." Mark ignored him, stepping closer. "After everything I did for you, Sarah, after I gave you—" Sarah shot to her feet, anger bubbling to the surface. "After what? After you lied, cheated, humiliated me? You don't get to play the victim, Mark. Not here, not anymore." The room went silent, the other patrons watching with barely concealed interest. Jennifer tugged at Mark's sleeve, whispering something urgent, but he shook her off. "Let's go, Mark," Jennifer tried again. "This isn't the time." "It's never the time, is it, Jennifer?" Sarah snapped, surprising even herself with the venom in her voice. "Funny how you're always lurking in the background, waiting to pick up the pieces." David placed a steadying hand on Sarah's arm. "Enough. He's not worth this." For a moment, Sarah felt the urge to continue tearing into Mark, to lay bare all the hurt and betrayal she had carried for so long. But as David's calm presence grounded her, she realized that giving Mark more of her energy was exactly what he wanted. "You're right," she said, her voice softening. She turned back to Mark, her expression resolute. "You don't matter anymore. Not to me." Mark's face reddened, but before he could respond, the elderly owner of the coffee shop, Mrs. Chen, appeared beside them. "This is a place for peace, not drama," she said sternly. "Take it outside or I'll have to ask you all to leave." Jennifer seized the opportunity to pull Mark toward the door, murmuring apologies to Mrs. Chen as they left. The tension in the room slowly dissipated as patrons returned to their conversations, though Sarah could still feel their curious glances. "Are you okay?" David asked, his voice low and steady. Sarah nodded, though her hands still trembled slightly. "I'm fine. Better, actually." David smiled, his expression a mixture of admiration and relief. "You handled that better than I expected." "I've spent enough time crying over Mark," she said. "I'm done giving him power over me." Mrs. Chen returned with 2 steaming mugs of hot chocolate, setting them down with a wink. "Sometimes the heart needs something sweeter than coffee," she said before walking away. Sarah couldn't help but laugh. She's not wrong. As they sipped their drinks, the warmth of the cocoa and the comfort of David's presence began to melt away the remnants of her anxiety. For the first time in weeks, she felt like she could breathe again. Over the next hour, their conversation shifted from the past to the future. David spoke of his travels, building schools in Nepal, working with conservation groups in Indonesia, and Sarah found herself inspired by his passion for making a difference. "I didn't know you wanted to own a gallery," David said, his gray eyes lighting up with interest. "What stopped you?" Sarah stared into her mug. "Mark thought it was too risky. He wanted me to join the Evans department store instead, managing their art acquisitions." "But that's his dream, not yours." "I know that now," Sarah admitted. "I think I knew it then, too, but I was too afraid to admit it." David leaned forward, his gaze unwavering. "You're stronger than you think, Sarah. You always have been." As his words sank in, Sarah felt a flicker of hope, an ember of the confidence she thought she'd lost forever. "Come with me to the family Christmas party," David said suddenly, breaking the comfortable silence. "What?" Sarah's eyes widened. "Come with me," he repeated. "You don't have to hide anymore. You don't have to let Mark control the narrative. Let's show everyone the real Sarah Mitchell, the one who's brave enough to fight for her dreams." Sarah hesitated, the thought of facing the Evans family again filling her with both dread and anticipation. But as she looked at David, she realized something important. She didn't want to face them alone. "Okay," she said, her voice steady. "I'll go with you." The next 2 days passed in a blur of nervous anticipation and late-night phone calls between Sarah and David. Their conversations revealed a depth of connection that had always been there, hidden beneath layers of unspoken words and restrained emotions. Each new revelation about Sarah's unfulfilled dreams, David's struggles to reconcile his wanderlust with familial expectations, felt like another piece of the puzzle clicking into place. On the evening of the party, Sarah stood before her mirror, smoothing down the emerald silk dress she had once bought with Mark in mind. Now, it felt like a new kind of armor, a declaration that she was reclaiming her identity. The delicate silver bracelet David had given her dangled from her wrist, a symbol of the hope she was beginning to feel for the future. A knock at her door jolted her from her thoughts. She opened it to find David standing there in a perfectly tailored black suit, holding a small bouquet of white winter roses. "You look stunning," he said, his voice warm and sincere. Sarah smiled, taking the flowers from him. "And you look nervous?" David laughed softly, running a hand through his hair. "First family Christmas in 5 years. I'd say nervous is an understatement." "Well," Sarah said, slipping her arm through his, "at least we're going in together." The Evans mansion was as grand and imposing as Sarah remembered, its sprawling lawn blanketed in freshly fallen snow. Twinkling lights lined the driveway, and the sound of a string quartet drifted from the open doors. As they stepped inside, the festive atmosphere seemed to pause, dozens of pairs of eyes turning to watch their arrival. Elizabeth Evans, David's mother, froze mid-conversation, her expression a mixture of shock and delight. "David," she gasped, hurrying toward them. "You're here? And Sarah?" Her gaze shifted between them, realization dawning. Oh my, this is quite the surprise. "Surprise, Mom," David said, wrapping her in a hug. "Merry Christmas." Elizabeth's embrace was warm and tearful, her joy at seeing her prodigal son overriding any questions she might have had. "I thought you wouldn't come," she said, stepping back to look at him. "And Sarah, dear, I wasn't sure." "I wasn't either," Sarah admitted, glancing at David. "But I'm glad I did." As the initial shock wore off, the party resumed its flow, though Sarah could still feel the curious glances and whispered conversations around them. David stayed close, his presence a reassuring anchor as they navigated the crowd. It wasn't long before Mark made his entrance, Jennifer at his side. The room seemed to hold its breath as his gaze landed on Sarah and David, his expression darkening. "Well," Mark said loudly, striding toward them, "if this isn't the most convenient little reunion, my ex-fiancé and my brother, how charming." "Mark," David said evenly, stepping slightly in front of Sarah, "don't make a scene." "A scene?" Mark's voice dripped with sarcasm. "Oh, I think the scene's already been made, don't you? Tell me, Sarah, was this the plan all along? Trade up from the heir to the prodigal son?" Sarah felt her temper flare, but before she could respond, Elizabeth stepped in. "That's enough, Mark," she said sharply, her tone leaving no room for argument. "This is not the time or place." Mark's jaw tightened, but he said nothing, stalking off toward the bar with Jennifer trailing behind him. Sarah exhaled, the tension in her shoulders easing as Elizabeth turned to her with an apologetic smile. "I'm sorry, dear," she said. "Mark has always struggled with sharing the spotlight." "It's fine," Sarah said, though her voice wavered slightly. "I'm used to it." "Not anymore," David said firmly, his hand finding the small of her back. "Not with me." Later in the evening, as the party began to wind down, David led Sarah to the conservatory, a glass-enclosed space filled with twinkling lights and the scent of winter blooms. Snow fell softly outside, creating a peaceful cocoon away from the lingering tension in the main house. "I used to come here to escape," David said, guiding her to a bench near the windows. "It always felt like the only place in this house where I could breathe." Sarah smiled, running her fingers over the silver bracelet on her wrist. "I used to sneak in here, too, during the parties when Mark was, well, being Mark." David chuckled, his gaze softening. "We must have just missed each other all those times." For a moment, the silence between them was heavy with unspoken words. Then, quietly, David said, "Sarah, I know this is fast, and I know things are complicated, but being here with you tonight, seeing how strong you've become, I can't pretend anymore." Her heart pounded as he took her hands in his. "I've loved you for years," he admitted, "even when I shouldn't have. Even when it was easier to leave than to stay and watch you with him." Tears filled Sarah's eyes as his words broke through the last of her defenses. "David, You don't have to say anything," he said quickly, his own voice unsteady. "I just needed you to know." Sarah reached up, cupping his face in her hands. "You don't have to leave anymore," she whispered. I've always been waiting for you to come back." As they leaned into each other, the conservatory doors burst open and Jennifer appeared, looking distraught. "I'm sorry," she blurted out, tears streaming down her face. "Sarah, I didn't know. Mark lied to me about everything. I just ended it." Sarah exchanged a glance with David before stepping toward Jennifer. "Thank you for telling me," she said, her voice kind but firm. "But you don't owe me anything. He lied to both of us." Jennifer nodded, fresh tears spilling over. "I hope you'll be happy," she said before retreating, leaving Sarah and David alone once more. David pulled her into his arms, his warmth chasing away the chill in the air. "This is where we start over," he said softly. Sarah smiled through her tears. "Yes, together." As snow fell outside, blanketing the world in quiet beauty, they danced to the distant strains of a Christmas song, their hearts finally aligned after years of missed chances.